Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the inspect module in Python, which unsurprisingly you use to inspect different things and find out information about code that's running or has been written, and you need to know something about that you can't just find out. And it has a few functions, and you can get information about all these different live objects, so while they're running. And it really provides 4 services, and the first one is type checking, so you can find out whether something is a certain type. You can get the source code for something that's run, which can be very useful if you want to reverse engineer it, or you don't know what it's actually doing. You can inspect classes and functions, find out information about them, and you can also look at the interpreter stack. But that's very complicated and can be quite messy, so we're not going to look at that in any detail. So the first thing we need to do is import everything from inspect, and we're also going to import Seaborn because we're going to use some of the functions as examples. So now we've got a bunch of items here, so you can see we've got the Seaborn module, print, int, the pair plot, the facet grid, the input and the range. And we've got all these functions to see what things are, so check if stuff is module, function, and so on. And we're going to go through each function, and on each line we're going to print all of these applied in the function. So if we just run that and see what's happened. So the first line represents what's a module, and you can see only the first thing, SNS, is a module. Then the second line is looking at what's a class, and it says that int is a class, the facet grid is a class, and the range is a class. And you can also see, on this next line that input is a method, and then on the line below that the SNS.pairplot is a function. And then we can see, on this bottom line, print is just a built-in, which is something slightly different. It also has functions not just for determining what things are, but also for getting the file. So we can see that the sns.kdplot is written in this file here, but it actually comes from a module of Seaborn distributions, which is in a different one. So I think like this is referring to this. And then we can get the source file, which is slightly different from the file, but in this case it's exactly the same one, where these two are saved. And now not only can we get the file, rather than looking at this file and browsing through everything, we can actually look at the source lines and see, this is everything, every line written in the source. Although to make things slightly easier, we can just print the get source, and it shows us everything in the source code. So you can see, that it's got this deprecated things over here, and over here we've got, all of these different things you can customize. And then it looks like not much extra happens here, or if it does, we can't see it because it's not being printed. And we could see the whole thing, but it is very complicated because Seaborn is one of those modules written by hundreds of people with so many things going on because it's a very complicated thing. We could also try and get the source file for other things that are built in. If we look at range, we can see that range is a built-in class, which means that if we try and get the source file, it's going to fail because it's written into Python. It's figured that range is not actually written in Python, it's written in another language and then compiled to be part of the Python language. So it's not something that you'd be able to look at. However, input is, and the input is written in this IPy kernel because it's part of the kernel, and we could look there and again find out what's going on. There's also this thing we can do when we get the callable args. So you can see when we call input, it requires a prompt, which is pretty well known. But it also has this self, and the self is, this kernel here. So it's actually a method that's part of the kernel, which is very interesting. And of course, you need to inspect things to find out stuff like this. And of course, we've got the signature, which just says when you ask for an input, there's this prompt and its default argument has no value. And the signature method to get the things that we're going to call are also useful for other things. So this sns.getEplot, we can see all the arguments that it had before, all the way across, and we can see what they are. And you can see by default it's got no x and no y. And this one, however, doesn't tell us that they're deprecated because those were in comments. But it's still interesting to see all the different things that are said and that you could customize. And this is a slightly easier way than looking at the documentation, although it's probably better to do so something this complicated. We can also get members, and I think this is best illustrated by the int class. So some of the things you can do with int are you've got this abs method. So this is a magic method that tells you the absolute value of an integer. And it's got this defined add method, and bool and so on. And so all these different methods that you can call on a number are saved here. And if we were to look at, for example, a boolean, so if we were to do the same and print get members bool, you can see that some of them are still there. So it's got, for example, this add method for adding things together. And this is quite interesting because it means that when you call a boolean add, it converts them to integers, which is very interesting, but not surprisingly, because you can treat true and false as just 1 and 0. And if we did this for string as well, then I'm sure we get some different methods. So for example, there's no abs because the absolute value of a string doesn't make sense. But when you add strings, it concatenates them. So again, you can see all these methods that are defined for different things. And if you had a class, then again, you could look at all the things that are defined for that class. And it's very interesting to see what you can and can't do with different data types. But for me, the inspect module is best illustrated with the getSource function, because in a single line we can get the source code of a function and then reverse engineer it if we don't. And you can see this is very simple. We just try and make this input request when we're making an input, and obviously the thing going behind it is quite complicated, but it's interesting to see what's happening. And if we wanted to rewrite the input class, we could copy and paste this and maybe add in an extra line that puts something at the end. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. You've learned that the inspect class is really useful for finding out things about different modules that you didn't know, and it's also interesting to look through things that you've never seen before and see what's actually happening. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. You're going to use the inspect class next time you get stuck, and I'll see you again same time next week. Till then.